My father was enthusiastic, to say the least, about certain things in his life. Music was one of them, of course. But he also had like his favorite actors, his favorite athletes, so many things that he enjoyed. And he was so quiet all the time that he didn't realize just how excited he was getting about a particular thing until he sort of physically kind of exploded and made some kind of display that shocked everybody in the room, because they didn't realize how much he was, getting off on a certain thing at a certain time. One of the things that he loved was hockey, and he shared that with me. He never missed hockey night in Canada, and he was incredibly passionate about that. And my mother used to tell a story. I don't remember this happening. I don't think I was there that night, but apparently he was watching the Stanley Cup playoffs, and he was a big Bruins fan, and Toronto. He loved Bruins in Boston and Toronto, and he was watching the Stanley Cup playoffs, and whichever team, it wasn't Toronto because they won in '67. It would have been, well, maybe it was '67. I don't know, but he was watching the playoffs. My mother didn't notice that he had been going to the kitchen every so often and mixing a drink. He wasn't making a scene. He was just, watching the game, and he kept getting further and further on the edge of his seat. And apparently, when the game-winning goal was scored, he jumped up to celebrate and ended up falling on his ass right in front of the television, and screaming, "Yeah, go Leafs, go!" or whatever team. Well, he just lost his mind, right? And my mother just nearly peed herself laughing, because she had no idea that he was drinking, let alone getting drunk. By the third period of the game, he was toast, and he was having a good time. So, that was my dad. You never knew what was really going on just by looking at him. He was a hard fellow to read. He had his movie heroes too. He loved John Wayne, Charles Bronson, and Clint Eastwood, and Steve McQueen. And I think he watched Bullitt about 6 times, and True Grit, and he loved those movies. And he was an avid reader. His favorite writer was Louis L'Amour. He had about, I don't know how many Louis L'Amour novels he had. There was dozens of them. They were all over the damn house, and he just read them constantly. He was such a huge fan of Westerns and that entire culture. And so he was a passionate fan about the things that he loved. He thought that Elvis Presley was the greatest thing that ever happened. Which is really weird, because he would have been in the generation of people that grew up. I guess he kind of grew up with Elvis, because Elvis was born in '35. So when my dad was 15 when Elvis was born, and so yeah, he kind of he kind of grew up with him, but at the same time, I think he was sort of in the generation of people who kind of discounted Elvis and as a flash in the pan, or maybe blamed Elvis for some of the social ills that were occurring in those days. And but no, my father just absolutely loved him, and he liked 70s Elvis, like from the '69 comeback special on. He loved the white jumpsuit Elvis. He thought that was the most incredible thing he'd ever seen. I can still remember actually watching live on television the Aloha from Hawaii concert with my dad. It was the first satellite broadcast concert, world broadcast ever done. Elvis Presley did it, and he wore the white suit with the eagle on the front and the cape, and in front of 55,000 people in Honolulu, and it was broadcast simultaneously all over the world. We watched that live on television, and it was really something to see. It was a moment that I shared with him that was just magical. We were witnessing history, and this. I loved Elvis too because I was exposed to him, and I remember the day Elvis died. I remember exactly what I was doing. I was sitting in the living room with Dad watching a Jerry Lewis movie. And obviously this was in August of 1977. And the Jerry Lewis movie it ended somehow with him, Jerry Lewis, being impaled by a swordfish. It was just ridiculous. He was in a hospital on an operating gurney with this fish through him. And I remember that as clear as day. Maybe that memory's flawed with age, but we were watching this, and that's the scene that was on when suddenly the newscaster broke in and said that Elvis Presley had died. And I'll never forget the look on my dad's face. It was shock and sadness. Like I looked at him. I said, "Wow, Dad, like, what happened? How could that happen?" And he never answered me. He stared off into space, and I could see, like, when I look back on that moment now, I see my father, reliving all the moments of his youth, when he was, because we all grow up with our favorite artists involved in our lives somehow. And Elvis did that for more people than probably any other artist in the history of music. The Beatles and bands like that, where all of the landmarks in our lives are marked by, can be associated with the things that these artists did, records they released, concerts they gave, television performances. And my father, I'm sure, watched Elvis appear on the Ed Sullivan Show for the first time, as well as the Beatles and other bands like that. And so it was an interesting moment between me and my dad when that happened. My father had a very unique sense of humor as well. He was a slapstick guy, and one of the things he used to do, like, he did so many things that were so funny and strange, and just to get a laugh out of whoever happened to be in the room. One of the things he used to do a lot to make me pee myself laughing was he used to wear these green baggy work pants all the time, and because he seldom was not working. He was either working away 5 days a week for Ellis Don, or when he had days off, he was at home either building things or fixing things that were broken, because he had a great mechanical sense too. He could fix electronic things as well as wooden things, And so he'd be wearing these green baggy work pants that he held up with a belt, of course. And when no one was looking, he'd be sitting in a chair. He'd undo the belt, the button, and the zipper, and he wouldn't let on that any of this had happened. He'd do it very quietly and when nobody was looking. Then he'd get up to go into the kitchen or somewhere, and when he stood up, started to walk away, the pants would fall down to right around his ankles, and he'd go, whoop, oh, whoops, oh, and he'd pull them back up, and I would die. I would absolutely lose it, fall on the floor laughing, right? And my mother would be like, "Oh, Paul, what are you doing?" And she'd start laughing, and it was just, he was just one of those guys that he didn't really care what he had to do to get the laugh. He just did it anyway. And, a lot of the laughs he got were accidental as well. Like, I remember one night, to give you an idea of just how ruckus these parties were that went on at my house. And now, mind you, when I keep saying the word house all during this series, and it's not an accurate portrayal because my mother and father, when they moved to Ontario, they never lived anywhere except apartments. That's all that they could afford, and so they rented apartments. They rented apartments, small townhouses. Like my first memory of anywhere that I ever lived was a townhouse on Toulon Crescent in London, Ontario. And it was a like they were row houses. They were townhouses all connected together in big blocks. And I remember going back there, as a child, remembering this huge backyard and this great expanse of space, but when you go back to those places as an adult, everything's so tiny, and it was. I went in there and went, wow, this is nothing like I remember. This is not, I remember this place being so humongous, and it's not big at all. So that was really weird, it was just a weird thing that happens, I guess, when you go back and look at these places as an adult. But they lived in apartments, so there was a lot of friction with neighbors because of my mother, of course, but these parties that went on were populated by my older brother's friends. So there was and people came to these parties to see my dad. These young guys, they were bikers and ruffians and young guys in their 20s, like. They loved my father. They came there to ask him to play the fiddle, and they just loved him. They thought it was the greatest thing to go in, and there'd be this madhouse party going on with my mother on the piano, my father on the fiddle, Joe playing guitar, Bob beating on something like a drum, and like whatever. And it was just booze and laughing their arses off and playing music all night until they either got tired or one of the neighbors called the cops. And there was one particular party I remember being allowed to stay, and I was allowed to stay up at most of these parties. My mother never used to put me to bed. Occasionally she did, but mostly I was allowed to be around when this stuff was happening, which was amazing. And it wasn't anything that she was doing consciously. She just didn't give a crap about what happened to me, really. And I shouldn't say that. She did, but in that way, she wasn't concerned with, having me witness people getting drunk and cursing and swearing and smoking cigarettes. And, of course, everybody smoked cigarettes then, but whatever. So there was this one party. My mother was playing the piano. She was drunk, and she went to, run her finger down the keyboard as a lick, in the middle of a song. And the piano was old and it had broken ivories on it. And when she did that, she basically cut the end of her thumb off on the ivory, and there was blood flying everywhere. It was all over the keyboard, and she kept right on playing. And so after the song was over, she looked at my dad and said, "Would you go and get me something to wrap my thumb up in?" So he gets up with the fiddle in his hand, and again, like he was one of these silent drunks. He got up with the fiddle, and when he got halfway into it was like a living room, then a dining room, and a kitchen. You could see them; they were in a row, And he got into the dining room, and he couldn't keep his feet, and he fell because he was drunk. And when he fell, the fiddle was the main concern, and the fiddle and the bow went up in the air. He landed on his ass with both feet in the air, and the fiddle was straight up in the air. He just fell, and he sacrificed his whole body to keep the fiddle from hitting the floor, right? And we all had a tremendous laugh at that because it was funny, and he didn't hurt himself. Drunks never hurt themselves very much. And, but, just stuff like that. There was just so many little legends about Dad doing funny, foolish things, And, like there was one thing, another one that I loved was when they were back in Shetty Camp. They had no money and no nothing, and my father was known as the most talented chicken thief in the whole county. They would go to parties, and they had taken a ride with somebody to this party up in Marguerite, and everybody got drunk and was playing music all night long, and my mother and father's ride was fixing to leave, go back to Shetty Camp, to Belmarsh, and my father excused himself they thought to go to the bathroom. He went out to the coop and stole about 3 or 4 chickens and put them in a sack and hid them in this guy's trunk of his car. It wasn't even his dad's car. He just put them in the trunk. And so out they leave with this guy to go back to Shetty Camp, and the guy's driving the car going, what the hell's that noise in the trunk? What's going on in the back of the car? Like, because the chickens were all alive and running around and squawking and chirping, and like, this was my dad, right? It was hilarious. And nobody ever said a word to him about doing stuff like that, because he was such a nice guy, and it was so innocently done. He didn't do it for mischief. They had no food. And technically, he'd gone in there and played for them for like 6 hours for no money. He entertained everywhere he went, and he was like, well, I'm going to take a chicken, right? Oh my God. It was just like those kind of stories about the old man are just legendary. Like he was a real case, that guy, I tell you, and a good one. It was not, he never caused anybody any grief at all. He only brought laughter and love to people. And when he did silly things like that, no one ever held it against him, because of what he was like. My father quickly became one of my targets as I grew as a musician. I spoke of my, wanting to impress my brothers, which was of ultimate importance to me. But there was something special about Dad. I would be a lot braver with my brothers when I was trying to impress them with something I'd done musically. But my father, I remember wanting to be ready when I stepped into that arena. And there was an album in our house, owned by one of my brothers. I think probably Joe bought it. It was a Jim Croce album called The Faces I've Been. And I think it was a posthumously released album of, it seemed to be incomplete, this record. There was some re-release things, there was some live things, but there was one thing in particular on that album that absolutely captivated me at the age of 6 years old. It was a song called Gunga Din, and it wasn't just the melody and the chord progression, it was the story. There was a story in this song that was absolutely epic. And at the time, a lot of the lyrics, I didn't even understand what they meant or what they were, or like it was beyond my ken, of what the song was really about. But I knew it was an epic story, and it was a story of bravery and a story of war and a story of suffering and gratitude. And there was so many great lyrics. I can remember listening to that song over and over and over and over again. And it became the first song that I ever attempted to sing. That was the very first one. And not only did I sing it, and the reason I could sing it is because Joe, he had a lot of brilliant tricks, Joe. In those days, a lot of the times, lyrics were printed on a sleeve inside the album. So Joe had pirated those sleeves and cut out the lyric right out of the sleeve and pasted it in a songbook. And so I had access to Joe's lyric songbooks, right, which was incredible because he used to write the lyrics out to everything. So I learned this song in private. I figured it out. I think I was about 7 years old, and I memorized all the lyrics. And Now, before I go any further, let me explain something. I didn't find out till much, much later that this song was not a song at all. It was a poem by Rudyard Kipling. That's why it was so brilliant. And Jim Croce had put the music to this poem. And my God, what a brilliant, brilliant melody and that he came up with, and the presentation of it. Jim Croce was a genius, taken from us in a damn plane. You know, he died because like a 4-seater plane clipped a pecan tree at the end of a runway. We lost that man. And it's so sad to me. And so memorizing a lyric like that for a 7-year-old boy, I imagine, would be fairly shocking to anybody who witnessed it. But I didn't see that. I just knew I loved the song and I wanted to sing it, and I wanted to sing it from my father. And the way I used to approach Dad was I'd wait till he was in the living room and maybe watching television, and I'd go in to the living room and without saying anything, I'd turn the TV down. And he'd never say a word to me, and I'd sit down on the floor in front of his chair. And I remember going in there and turning the TV down and sitting on the floor and singing that song for him. From beginning to end, the whole thing, not one mistake, all the lyrics. The chords weren't that easy either. And my mother, I think my mother and Joe were there in the room as well. And my father sat there in the chair, and the tears rolled down his face, and something I'll never forget. And at the time, I didn't realize what I was doing. To me, it was just a piece of performance art. And I guess you could say I had no concept of how abnormal what I was doing looked to other people. I was just wanting to make my dad happy. And he talked about that moment for a long while. He didn't know how to handle it. He didn't know what he just saw. He was like, what just happened? You know, my 7-year-old son walked, and my father knew the songs. He loved the album too. And here I walked, sat on the floor and sang the whole thing without ever reading a lyric or using any kind of assistance at all. And it had a profound effect on him, and in turn on me. And so I have Jim Croce and Rudyard Kipling to thank for that moment with my father. And it was an intense moment, and it stayed with me for years. Especially later on in my life, it stayed with me. And it's still a song today that I don't sing it very much because I have no occasion to sing it really. But that was the moment that I sort of became a singer. I'd heard other writers, I heard Lightfoot, and I heard the Beatles, and I heard Lightfoot was, that's just another story altogether. But that song and that moment, when I heard Croce sing that song, it altered my perception of my own abilities somehow. It was like, okay, I'm working on playing this instrument as good as I can, but I can also reach people by singing to them. There's yet another form of communication here that I might not have explored fully, but this moment, sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of my dad and watching him cry and not realizing what was really going on, it was like, okay, there's something else beyond just guitar music. And maybe I should think about trying to copy a songwriter. Maybe I can write songs, and it didn't happen for years. I never wrote anything until I was probably, I think the first song I ever wrote, I was 16 years old. So it was many years ahead of me before I ever attempted to make up something myself. But the seed was planted by that moment. That was the defining moment. And it's amazing that I can look back and see it, like, I think a lot of artists, especially today, it's a different world today, learning and growing as a musician. There's more tools, there's online, there's just so many things available to people now that I didn't have. And maybe that's why I have such a clear vision of these tiny moments, these 4-minute spans of time that occurred down through my life that completely altered the course of my existence. And I just this is one of them. Looking back at that was the moment where I pretty well cemented the rest of my life. I was at that moment. It had, like, the full ramifications of it hadn't hit me, but that moment was when I set the road for what I would do the rest of my life. I was going to be, splitting my artistic mind between becoming the best guitar player I possibly could and preparing myself to get up in front of people and sing, to elicit an emotional response, which I, strangely enough, I never saw tears during a song as a negative experience. That was another thing that kind of is weird. I just knew that the outlet of emotion through music is a good thing. It's a great thing. It doesn't matter if music makes you laugh or cry or poop on the floor. It doesn't matter what it does to you. It's that emotional release and the connection you make with the artist you're listening to or seeing live or whatever. That's the thing. That's the ticket that makes life, better. And that moment with Dad was certainly made my life better in the long run. It's something I'll never forget. You may talk of gin and beer when you're stationed way out here, and you're sent to penny fights in Aldershot. But when it comes to slaughter, you'll do your work for water, and you'll lick the bloomin' boots of him that's got it. Now and in just sunny clime, where I used to spend my time, serving Her Majesty the Queen. Of all the black-faced crew, the finest man I knew was Regimental Beastie Gungadine. Oh, the uniform he wore was nothing much before, and rather less than half of that behind. But a piece of twisty rag and a goatskin water bag was all the field equipment he could find. When a sweating troop train lay in a siding through the day, when the heat would make your bloomin' eyebrows crawl, we shouted Harry by till our throats were bricky dry, then whopped him 'cause he couldn't serve us all. He would not carry on till the longest day was done, and never seemed to know the use of fear. If we charged or broke or cut, you could bet your bloomin' nut he'd be waiting 50 paces right flank rear. With his moustick on his back, he would skip to our attack and watch us till the bugles made retire. And for all his dirty hide, he was white, clear white inside, and went to tend the wounded under fire. It was Dean, 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 bullets kicking dust spots on the green. But when the cartridges ran out, you could hear the front file shout, "Send ammunition mules and Gunga Din." Well, I shan't forget the night when I fell behind a fight with a bullet where my belt plate should have been. I was choking mad with thirst, and the man that spied me first was good old grinning, grunting Gunga Din. He lifted up my head and he plugged me where I bled, and he gave me half a pint of water green. It was crawling and it stunk, but of all the drinks I have drunk, I'm most grateful to the one from Gunga Din. Well, he carried me away to where Dooley lay, and a bullet came and drilled the beggar clean. He carried me inside, and just before he died, "I hope you like your drink," said Gunga Din. So I'll meet him later on in the place where he has gone, where it's always double drilled, no canteen. He'll be squatting on the coals, giving drinks to poor damned souls. I'll catch a swig in hell from Gunga Din. It was Dean, 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 you Lazarusian leather Gunga Din. Though I belted you and flayed you, by the living God that made you, you're a better man than I am. Gunga Din.